recording. There we go.
Hey guys, welcome back to our third lecture. Today is going to be on intents and manifest and everything related to that. We have a lot of announcements for you. In terms of adding this course on Student Center, we're still working out the logistics with Walker and also with the Gates admin. But we will update on Piazza when we get a clear answer. But for now, we are still grading all homeworks on CMS, even if you aren't officially enrolled in the class. Grades are out for homework 1. Yeah, so grades are out for homework 1. Some of you guys got really low grades just because we couldn't grade your homework or we couldn't open them up. So if you got a really low grade, please come talk to us after class, and we'll kind of like help you sort out how to actually zip your files correctly. And this is really important because if you got a really low grade, you want to maybe potentially resubmit your homework for homework 2 and also like submit it correctly for homework 3. Weekly quizzes or weekly surveys are mandatory. They're roughly 10% of your grade, so it's important that you do take them. Kevin and I do look at the survey results, and we sort of calibrate our lecture and our demo based on the feedback we get. And finally, our weekly homework is going to ramp up very soon. They're going to get slightly more difficult. There also, the stuff on the homework may not directly come from the lecture or the demo, so it's important that you come to our office hours if you do need help, or also you can use Piazza. So in all our homework assignments, also in our demos, we briefly talk about activities, but we don't really go into the details of what they are. So at a very high level, each screen on the app sort of pertains to a single activity, but this isn't always true. Sometimes only a segment of a full screen can be an activity. Sometimes that screen or that segment is actually a fragment. This is something that you don't need to know about for this lecture, but it is something we'll talk more about in future lectures. And sometimes they're not activities or fragments, they're just XMLs. They're just like pure display. And so that is super, super confusing, but I'll just go through a quick example. So this is eatery. Currently, we have the main activity and a campus eatery activity. So 2 full screens you see right here are activities. That means that every logic that goes through that exists inside these 2 screens belong to the activity. But the screen square is actually a fragment. So you can see that the fragment is layered on top of the activity. That means that anything that belongs inside the screen square, some of the logic actually is part of a fragment, but it's not connected to an activity. And if you look at waiting times over here in the red square, that's actually XML. So that's not really related to activities or fragments. So all that is really confusing. And really, like, activities and fragments in XML are kind of just Java classes with different restrictions. And so at a very high level, like, they really kind of just are different Java classes. And so you can kind of use them however you want. However, in the Android community, they sort of established this way of using different components for different purposes. And the main reason why you want to follow these sort of like these standards that are set is so that your app will not crash and you will have the most success in terms of making your Android app. So just for this lecture, all you need to know is that activities and fragments have something called lifecycle events, and XML does not. So in terms of lifecycle, this is a rough flowchart of what the lifecycle looks like. You'll see that the app or the activity can be in several states: starting, running, pause, stop, and destroy. And there are a lot of methods that are correlating to these different states, as you see here. In terms of our homework assignments, what you've been working so far with, it's just been with onCreate. And for the most part, I don't know why, okay. So for the most part, you really only need to be changing code inside onCreate. This is called when your activity first starts, and it's only invoked once every time your activity is created. So if you decide to make your activity and your activity is paused or is background, but it's not necessarily destroyed, you won't be calling code again inside this method. There's also something that's called onStart that runs right after onCreate. Generally, you don't need to touch this method unless you're dealing with state management, which is a very complex topic, and most likely you won't be doing something like this in this course. OnResume is generally called after onStart. This is when the app comes officially to the foreground. This is like if you decide to background the app and you open another app and you go back to your original app, your activity would actually call onResume and not onCreate or onStart. There's also onPause. This is when you first leave, the very instance you leave the activity. So normally this is when you background activity, and right after on pause, on stop this ran. So normally here is where you'll commit a lot of changes to your data. So if you decide to change the edit text, or you maybe click a few buttons, you will save data inside on stop. And finally, we have on destroyed. This is either when you decide to close the activity completely, or when you potentially rotate your phone and the activity is destroyed and recreated. But in general, even with all these lifecycle events, you really only need to know about on create. The rest of these are more complex, and you're more likely to deal with them when you're actually dealing with fluid data or data that's going into a database that's on the cloud. And then now we'll go into intents. So this is the main way you can communicate with different app components inside your app or also just outside your app. There's two types, explicit and implicit. So in terms of explicit intents, this is used when you want to communicate between different activities. The general setup is that you declare an intent, you make it, you say where your context is as your first parameter, then you say where your target activity is. And then you have something called bundles, where you can put all the information you want inside this thing called bundle. And then when you send the intent through a start activity, you actually send the bundle with it. So sort of like a package that goes through. And this bundle acts sort of like a dictionary in Python, so you set the key and the value. And then at the end, when in your second activity, you will call the bundle using this chunk of code that Kevin will probably show later. And that's how you get the information. So for example, if I had eatery here, and I decided to click on nasties, I would actually create an intent called eatery name. And inside the eatery name will contain the word bears necessities. And then I will use that information to grab more information out of a database, and that'll allow me to display everything on the screen here. Because otherwise, Android Studio wouldn't know what information to display on a second activity if we didn't have intents. And then we also have implicit intents. This is something more complex, but it does make the user experience a lot better. This is mainly used to launch other applications or other processes onto your device. There's a super long list of different intents you can have, or different implicit intents. Just a short list is you can create a shortcut, you can share information, you can turn off your screen, or you can set your wallpaper. There's just a huge list, and you can do plenty of stuff. It's really important that you know how to do this because you will be asked to do something similar on your homework. So in the GIF you see here, I'm sending information from my podcast app to my DMs on Instagram. And when I open it up, you'll see that information about the podcast shows up inside my DMs. Another example on eatery is clicking on an eatery and sending populating my phone app with a phone number. And so you can also do sending information to another app. So in this example, I'm basically opening up Yelp through the eatery app. And this just makes the user experience a lot better because you can sort of prematurely either enter in information into other apps or open up other apps so that it's not just the second app's launch page. And then I'll talk about the manifest. So you guys probably seen the manifest file inside eatery, or not inside eatery, inside your homework and inside the demos. It is a very important file, and it's crucial that you do include the Android manifest file when you submit your app projects to us, but also when you're creating apps. Basically, it defines information about the application names, the activities and fragments you have inside the apps, permissions you need to run the app, and also software requirements. Every activity that you decide to have in your app must be declared in a manifest. Generally, this is done automatically, but it's not always guaranteed. So if your app is not working, it's really important that you check your manifest and make sure that your app is inside, or your activities and also fragments and other things to declare are inside a manifest. So this is roughly what it'll look like inside a manifest. For the most part, you won't be modifying this. A really crucial code that's also inside a manifest is something called an intent filter. The most important one is a launcher. This is how Android Studio decides which activity launches when you first open up your emulator, when you first open up the app. Generally, this is also done automatically for you, which is why you're able to open up the app on your emulator without changing anything in the manifest. However, if you decide to refactor your app or you decide to change up your activity, it's important you know how to edit this chunk of code. And then for permissions, it's more important now than ever that you know how to I guess, ask for permissions, but also you know how to deal with a situation where the user doesn't give permission, just because Android is more strict about this now. So some common permissions you may ask for is like location, internet use, asking for use of the user's photos and images, and also video. All required permission must be announced inside your manifest using this line of code. And it's also important that you do respond to situations where the user denies permission. So for example, in Eatery, if you notice right now, if you have an Android phone, sometimes depending on the permission you give, the map will actually be empty. And that's because you're not giving permission for Eatery to use your current location. And so the map will just display nothing. But it's important that you respond to these situations because you don't want the app to crash if you don't give permissions. I think like one of the worst user experience you can create for an app is to have the app crash. It's important that you either create like a dialog page or you like create some sort of notice so the user knows that they need to give permission. Yeah, so now we'll just move on to the demo.
All right, sounds good. Cool. So I'm just going to have everyone first just really quickly create a new Android Studio project. We're just going to start from scratch and play around with a few of the topics we've just talked about. Start off with an empty activity, as per the usual. Java, set the SDK to whatever you'd like, and let's call this the Intense Playground, because that's going to be what we're doing. Let that build. Give it time. Yep, all right, that's too small. One more. Settings, editor, general, font. Let's get that up to 18. Apply that. Color scheme. All right. Yeah, some people said that they prefer, well, this is more, this is easier to see on a screen like this, so we're going to be starting with that. Awesome. So let's play around with some intents, shall we? So currently we have a main activity. The main activity has, hello world on it. Standard, normal. Let's say we wanted another activity in our system that had, just another, let's say a basic activity this time. Sure, main2 activity. And this one has a next button in it. So how do we get from main activity over to the second activity? Well, let's first give it some kind of actionable item that we can use. A little note for constraining views. If you only constrain two sides, like, hold on. Yeah. If you only constrain two sides like this, then the view will not know actually how high up the screen it will go. It shows up here just fine because you've just put it there, but it has no clue how far up or down it has to be. In which case you might want to give it some vertical constraints as well. This puts that right over top of the other one. To mitigate that, I'm going to give the button about a 100 dp margin. There we go. Yeah, and I'll make this button, with the clever name button, the trigger for sending us from one activity to another. So button, button, and button. Alt enter for automatic imports. And then let's give this a on-click listener. that sends this to the second activity. So I'm going to create a new intent. Intent equals new intent, and then let's see here. Perfect. So how do we get from this to that? Now, many things you want to get from the current activity you're on, this, over to the other activity. You might think main to activity, just put it there and get it done with, right? That's not exactly how Android works. You need to specify that this is the class of main to activity. It's still giving me an underline though, and that's because of one thing. This currently refers to the anonymous class known as an onClick listener. That doesn't quite fly here, so you'll see main activity dot this as the correct package context to use for intents when you're inside an onClick listener. So let's see. And then to go to that intent, all you need to do is start activity. And then give it an intent. And that will send you from main activity to the second activity. No problem. I'm going to just start up the emulator right now, so it has time to load up. Now, what if you want to do a little bit more than that? Because that's kind of plain. It's just a swap from one activity to another. What if the second activity needs to know something about the first activity? Like if you're logging in and you need to send the login credentials that you've logged in from the login page to the main activity. Then you need a bit more than this. So you can put extra things inside your intent. It's just called put extra. You'll notice here that there are extras for nearly everything. So for ints, for bytes, for cars, every single thing you can pretty much think of in terms of simple data structures will be in here as an option. So I'm going to put an extra little thing in here. Cookie. You have to give it a tag. That's what it's going to retrieve it on that name. You'll see it starts giving me a little name hint there. And so for the value in this case, I'm going to say, hello YouTube, because we're going to be putting this online. And that should also send, under the key cookie, this string. Cool. So we have a second activity here with, what's that, a fragment inside? And a floating action button, and whatnot. All right. Let's also give it a second text view just for our own sake. Yeah, that sounds good. No, parent. Really? Why is it still in the corner? 500. That is not doing that right. There we go. And a little better. 200. 100. Cool. So here's a text view we have. I'm going to just give this text view a name and then make it happen right here. Text view equals view.id r.id.text view 2, I believe. Oh, did I not set this button? Oh, good thing I didn't compile that yet. Button. There we go. Awesome. So now I want to get that data from the other activity, from that intent, and bring it over here. There are a few things you might want to keep in mind. One, getting data from that intent doesn't. The So let's see. Get intent will get you the intent. Get extra will get you the extras. There is an issue here though. Get extras doesn't always have, isn't always a object. You might find it. You might find that it's null if the intent calling it hasn't actually sent it anything. Like if you just launch directly into main2 activity, you might not get extras in there. So in this case, calling something on a null object will obviously crash it. So I'm going to do a few checks first. Bundle b equals this. So the extras are inside a bundle. I'm going to first do a quick null check to see if b is not equal to null. Then we're going to get the extra thing from the bundle. Get string. And then I'm going to put it into m.textView. Oops. Set text. I am getting this confused with Kotlin. All right. Yeah. So this now should, inside m.textView, apply the string that has been sent to this activity, and we're going to give that a shot. That should not be where it is. All right, so it's going to launch the activity. And, did it just like automatically crash or? One moment. Yep, all right, something's wrong here. M button. Yeah, okay. That's a mistake. Refresh. So now this button should, in theory, if I click it, jump to the second activity and replace that text there. Awesome. Now, that's probably something you have done, you might have done before at this point. It's almost the first thing you start learning in like Android development, just these simple intents. But not many people know that these intents can be used for other things as well. So if I don't directly specify what this intent is meant to be sending, if I don't directly specify that the intent sends to a very specific thing, I can have it, hold on, there we go. I can create a new intent that sends, just calls out to the system to do something with this information. In this case, I'm going to do intent.set action, and then intent.send action send. And so from there, I'm going to put something extra in there. Because action send is a specific thing that Android calls, it already has intent.extra string, I believe, is the extra text. So you have to give it this particular string as the key, and then this becomes the value that it sends. In terms of action send, you also have to set a type. Set type. In this case, that's text plain. Yeah. Cool. So this should call out to everything else in the system and ask it, hey, are you a messaging style app? If so, here is a string that I want you to send. This is what the share button does. This is what the share button on YouTube does. It will call out to everything else in the system and ask it, hey, can you share with? So in this case, it'll give you a bunch of options like Gmail, Clipboard, Drive. And if you do, click one of these just once. Gmail will open, and add in the text that I gave it. Isn't that cool? So if you wanted, you can now quickly knock out a little clipboard app that has a bunch of little strings and spam people with it. Like you have copy pastas that you want to just send out to people. There you go. This is how you do it. So on to a few more little topics. In the homework, we're going to be having you guys use permissions and in particular location. Now, I'm gonna be spoiling a lot that's in the homework right now, but this is probably good because we haven't covered it in enough depth at this point. So I'm gonna go into course. Yeah. So, okay, one of the things that Android does really well is permissions. Like everything in here, you can set the precise permissions that you're handing to the app. So, let's see, storage. No. Where is it? Apps and permissions, there we go. So it's like Gmail has permissions to do what? It currently has permissions to access the calendar, access the contacts, and access storage. You can disable each and every one of these, but you can disable just one of these at a time. So now Gmail can't access the contacts, but it will still run as an app. It will still take your emails. It will still send your emails to the specific thing. You just can't read from your contacts and give you hints on who to send it to. So Android does that really well, and it hasn't always done that. There was a time where you can just put in permissions, in like a list of permissions inside your manifest. And when you download from the App Store, you have to agree to essentially all of those being enabled in the app. That's changed since API 23. So yeah, so if any modern app isn't going to have that issue, but that also means we have to deal with it. So how do we access permissions? How do we request to do something that the system deems a bit more dangerous than something else? Well, we have to access the manifest. This is the Android manifest. It tells me everything about the app at the moment. It tells me that there's 2 activities in there. One of them can be launched as the starting activity from the app's drawer. That this application has this as the icon, that it has supports round icons, that it has list theme, that this one has no action bar. So if you want to get rid of that like big blue bar with the app name on the top and you want to have your own there, you can give it a theme without an action bar, and that's what that's for. But ahead of everything, this is where you put your permissions. So in this case, I would like to use the permission known as access find location. Storage, camera, gyroscope, all this stuff is within the permission system. So this will now tell the app, I would like to request that this permission be a thing. I'm gonna refresh. Because currently currently this app doesn't have any permissions that it requests. However, now it does have a little location checkbox inside settings. That's not particularly useful because then users don't know that location has to be enabled for something to work. So how do you ask for location permissions? Well, let's start here. Okay. So this is a long string of code that you will find often online to copy off of. So context compat dot check self permission. You have to check to make sure that you have the permission already. If not, then you get the permission. Manifest dot permission dot location. So in this case, we have find location that we're asking for. We check that it's not equal to package manager. Again, this is not something that you have to memorize or even keep in. Yeah, just keep in mind that this exists and that you have to find this and copy paste it online. To get permissions to ask for permission sometimes. So, how do you request permissions? Let's see. Activity compat dot request permissions. So who are we requesting these permissions for? We're requesting it for this. Yeah. And what permission are we requesting? A new string array, specifically of manifest dot permission dot access find location. You can ask for multiple permissions through this string array, which is why it has a string array. But in this case, we only need one permission, and you have to give it a request code. So this now should, when the app is launched, ask for permission to use location data. And it will only ask if it doesn't already have that permission. And finally, we're going to touch upon one last thing that we haven't really discussed. So to get location services, yeah. This is actually a callback thing. So when you request for something to be completed for you in Android, it often asks you to give it a request code. That way you can, because this really can be anything. That way, when it comes back to you, when it's done, you can do something about it. So there is a method that you can call that will take a request code and do something depending on the request code given to it. This will be the case for activities that you start for results. So in this case, you don't have to even, there are activities that you don't just start. There are some activities that you start activity if needed for results. And then immediately this will tell me that's actually not what this uses. It uses an intent and a request code. So then you can start an activity, ask for a result back from that activity, right? Like if Gmail is asking you to write a draft, and then you want that draft back to send it off to someone, you might give it a request code. That way you can actually do something with it when it comes back. This is just a tracking number, essentially, like packages. Actually, just like packages. Yeah, we're gonna do one quick thing. You guys probably, at some point during your Android career, you're gonna have to touch the Gradle build files. These things are auto-generated for you when you create the application. However, these are vital to building the application. Specifically, they tell what libraries and what things and like the build types that you have. This is where you're going to find the specifications that you've typed in for the minimum versions, the target versions, what version code your app is. Like if you're uploading multiple things, if you're uploading an update to an app for the App Store, it has to be a higher version code than the previous one, so it knows that this is an update and not the same app. Ignoring all that, down here is a place called dependencies. And this is where you guys are actually going to have to tinker a little to get implementation. This is where you guys are going to have to tinker to get location services working. Because location on Android is provided by Google Play services, and that requires you to tinker around with these. One moment as I grab the build.gradle. Nope, that's the wrong one. Okay, I'd like to point out there are two of these. There are two build.gradles. One of them is the project build.gradle. This has a few things in it. You never have to touch this one. One is the app build.gradle. That's the one you really, that's the one you have to care about. So in here, I'm going to grab com.google.android.gms play services location, and then the version of this library 17.0.0. That was a mouthful. That is something that you don't have to memorize. You will find that by looking up location Android library. And Google Play will be right there for you to copy paste this nice little font. But if you ever see a string like this regarding a library, so for networking, you might use squares, OKHTTP. For maps, you might need the Google Maps API. Depending on what you're using, this is where you put libraries and whatnot. And then after you put in a library, you're going to have to rebuild the app. So it's going to have to import that library into your system and then allow you to use that library. In this case, we've just done that. And so now I should be able to access. Yes. OK. So private fused. Fused location provider client. That is now importable. So that was a package from Google GMS location. That is not something that will automatically be part of your Android project when it's built. So that is how you import a library. And then from there, you can ask for location services from the fused location client equals location services. Location services dot get used location provider client this. Yeah. So let's see. M dot fuse location dot get last location. There we go. Now we have location. Yeah. And then cool. So every single library has their own little things that you have to do to get methods. They have their own methods. They have their own calls and whatnot, and you'll find that in the documentation for this. In this case, you have to do on success listener on success. So in this case, it asked for location from the library, and then on success, it will give you the location. This is a bit of a mess. This is something that you're gonna have to use this for the homework, so I'm just gonna give you guys a heads up on it quickly. Yeah, and that covers intents, implicit intents, permissions, libraries. Is anything else? Yeah, it's like the manifest is where. Oh yes, so intent filters. Yeah, we can. I mean, yeah, intent filters. So, yeah, just like you can send an intent, this is where Android asks what activities can take what intents. So in this case, the intent filter is filtering for things with the category of launcher. Launchers are Android. It's essentially what displays the Android screens. It's the app drawer, it's the whatnot. You can download different launchers and have completely different customized Android views. There's ones that make your phone look like iOS, and you can play around with that. But essentially, this asks for anything from those launchers to understand that this app exists and to put this inside the app drawer. So an intent filter that filters for like the action send that we just did would now allow this activity to be shared to as well. You can now share text with this activity. It essentially is telling the rest of Android, hey, this app can do this, this, and this, and if you'd like to, you can send it here. Your Messenger app will have a filter here for receiving like share messages and whatnot. And yeah. Yeah, a little ahead of time.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is it for the lecture. For homework 3, you are required to use your homework 2. So if you haven't finished homework 2 yet, it's important that you finish that up as soon as possible. Just because homework 3 is a little bit involved, because you are touching topics related to like permissions, intents, manifest, like everything like that.
Yeah, so homework 3, I've covered much of this now. So you're modifying your trichromatic app to do just a little bit more. In this case, you want it to not only do RGB, but also HSV, hue saturation value. This is an alternate color palette system that you might find if you're an artist. It depends on hue, so from all the colors of the rainbow, saturation, how deep those colors are, and then the value, how dark those colors are. That you can essentially get everything from HSV in RGB, but you might have a little bit of lossy changes between the two. Essentially, you want to be able to have to have everything on this screen. If you click the button that sends it to the other screen, to have it jump from one screen to another and not lose the color. Ooh, I'm actually gonna have to edit this PDF. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So send the color back and forth. So the same thing should display. Yeah. You'll also play around with a location color. I've attached a little string here that will convert a location latitude into roughly an acceptable hex code string. And so you are going to add a button that finds your current location color. So it's going to access the location permission and then find out what color is this location at the moment. So it's just taking whatever latitude you're currently at and turning that into a unique color for where you are. And then finally, you're going to add a little share button that will allow you to share your color with other apps. So it'll just tell, so you can send your friends on Slack, check out this color that I just made. Here's a color hex. Yeah. Again, same things as usual, a few new side quests, and a few references that you might have to look up to figure out exactly how to do things. Yeah.
Thank you for coming to our lecture. We'll be up here answering any questions you have, either about like homework 1 or just about today's lecture.
Like, this is a really stupid question, but I have a hard time. So, like, I realized, I guess I actually must have, like, this is what happens when I just like, today. Oh, wait. So I think this is.
Yeah, okay, so let's see.
Yeah, that looks about
Yeah,
right.
okay, so
Are you
the
able
project
to
structure
resubmit?
looks.
I
Actually,
can
yeah, the
change
project
it on
structure looks
CM
wrong.
Or,
today,
yeah, on
because
CMS, so you
if it keeps loading, and it's like if it shows
I need to talk to Kevin about
not
if we're gonna
up
give
here,
points
but
back
here,
for this
like
one.
if
But I
it
wouldn't
looks
worry
like a
too much
folder
because it is a
structure,
Pascal class.
it means
Okay.
it didn't build correctly.
Oh, okay. I tried several
So
different
I'm
times.
gonna rebuild the project and see if I can get
Let
some.
me see this though.
This is the start.
Yeah, I can't.
Okay, I must have closed it. Let me
Ah,
reopen it.
let's see. Gradle. That is really. Cancel.
And then let me change the late deadline.
Let's see.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you should be able to read a submit. We'll have to discuss whether or not you get points back for this one. Yeah, but I feel like in the overall scheme it won't affect your grade that much.
Okay.
Should we worry about
Wait,
CMYK after this homework?
Oh, because you already implemented that.
Yeah.
Where's all this
How
stored?
intrusive is it? Is it just like a button that you click it and switch
I
it
think
to
so. Yeah,
RGB?
I did a switch and then like lowers, like, well, it's an additional bar like is hidden at first, and like the switch makes it visible again.
I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's not related to any of the side quests. If you find that it's like kind of intrusive, like you just get rid of the
Alright.
CMYK stuff.
Okay.
It looks like a proper
So-
folder.
I had initially filled out the form to take both the iOS class and the Android class, and I wasn't sure which one I wanted. And I noticed that I'm enrolled like on CMS in the iOS class as well, but I'm not actually enrolled in the class in Student Center. Like, is that gonna have any effect on like points? Because I haven't been doing the iOS assignments.
So you're basically just going to both classes. But you're not
So,
enrolled on Student
cool.
Center.
Yeah.
So if you're not enrolled on Student
Math
Center,
is
you
here
wouldn't get
now.
a grade for this class. Yeah.
So
Yes,
don't
okay,
worry about
that
it.
looks
Yeah, unless
cool.
you want to enroll in like both
Yep.
classes. Because you don't necessarily need to show up to both lectures.
No, you're right. It's like
Yeah, it's
that.
up to you.
So I'm gonna try building it
Okay,
again
cool. Thank you.
because the original build sync didn't work. And now this should properly build it, put it all in the right spots, and then when it configures, 3, 2, 5, 9, 26.
Can I ask why is this happening? Like,
Okay, so when Android Studio builds a project, right?
right.
It's like it can act as a normal text editor, just like VS Code, where I'll just show you the normal folder format.
Right.
Or you can give you a specific one for Android, which will look like this, where it's like an app at the top and whatnot. If it doesn't look like that, it means that the build has failed, and it means there's something wrong with exactly how you set it up or open it.
Got it. And then like, how do you do rebuild?
So just build, and then it's like clean project will clear out all the old build artifacts and then rebuild it again. Rebuild, well, no, we'll just clear out all the stuff and then you can build. Rebuild just does that though.
Got it.
Yeah. At which point, after this is done, then this all should show up correctly.
Got it. It's probably gonna take a long time. I'm just gonna take it, and because I need to run for
Backend?
backend. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank
Best of
you.
luck.
Do you actually need to change this PDF? I thought I made it.
I also kept this thing running too long.